Turns out what I said in the last video still holds true. I am still a father. But even though I wanted to take the videos lightly to save some time, Riot dumped out an insane amount of content, which includes a new Bard for TFT, a new Bard for TFT, and a new Mordekaiser Bard for TFT. But we also got the final part of Volibear's story, and we even got a sprinkle of Tryndamere on top of that. And so, because I know people are hyped for Volibear, I decided to push myself a little harder, even though I really don't have any free time now. And I managed to put together a video for the Volibear. So now, without further ado, here is the complete story of Volibear. Although we know Volibear by many names, such as the Thunder's Roar, the Great Storm, Valier, the Ruin, the Thousand-Pierced Bear, or even He Who Stands, which is probably his ancient title, similar to They Who Endure and She Who Wanders. Volibear's real name is a mystery, which only he himself knows. On top of that, even though we call him Volibear, he is actually supposed to be called the Volibear by mortals, because he is more than just a physical demigod. In the north, the Volibear represents unstoppable power and fury of the Freljord itself. It was the Volibear and his demigod brethren who formed the land they called Voriard, long before mortal races arrived. Of course, this means that Voriard is just an ancient name for Freljord. Legends say that the Volibear created the 5 fjords with one mighty swipe of his claw. Interestingly enough, the story never explains where are the 5 fjords. But if you look at what Freljord looks like now, I think these would be the 5 fjords at the far north. Besides this, other legends say how the Volibear fought a savage magma serpent called Rond. During this battle, they created countless volleys and ravines. When the Volibear finally defeated the beast, its blood became the first river in Freljord, and its colossal corpse formed the Wormback Mountains. When people started populating Runeterra, and the first tribes started to form in Freljord, wild magic flowed freely, and the Volibear was worshipped by all who wished to gain the strength to survive. Soon, great wars raged, and the Volibear stood beside his followers, wearing rune-inscribed armor, made by his brother Ornn, the demigod of the Forge. At that time, the bond between the two brothers was strong, and they often fought at each other's side, even though Ornn never had the same lust for battle. But as the Volibear fought more and more, humans gave him more blood offerings, and with it, his power grew. What's interesting is that this part of the story confirms that these primal demigods grow in power the more people worship them. As time went on, however, all the different demigods drifted apart, each following their own pursuits. But things got much worse when the era of the Three Sisters arrived. The Three Sisters wanted to bring order to Freljord, but the demigods couldn't agree on how to deal with them. A few, like Anivia, were willing to work with the sisters, while the Volibear and a demigod called the Iron Boar wanted to destroy them, and others were just willing to ignore them completely, since these mortal creatures would eventually die like those before them. Unfortunately, it was the Volibear who decided to make the first move, and he looked to the most savage followers he had, known as the Ursine. With them, he would defeat the Three Sisters, and to make it easier, he asked Ornn to help him out by crafting weapons and armor for his new army. Of course, Ornn refused, because he did not approve of the Ursine's savage ways. And with that, Volibear torn off the armor his brother made for him, and a terrible fight erupted between the two demigods. This fight is described in greater detail in the story The Lost Tales of Ornn. There we learn that there was a little bit more to the reason why Volibear attacked his brother. For example, Volibear was jealous of Ornn's own followers, who worshipped Ornn out of their own will. They didn't do it because they had to survive, like was the case with the Volibear. They followed Ornn because he was just a great friendly guy. Funnily enough, Ornn never even cared about people worshipping him, and yet, no matter what he was crafting in his forge, he was always surrounded by mortals, watching what he was doing and learning from him. Anyway, the outcome of the great battle was the destruction of Ornn's mountain, which was called Hearthhome. And with it, Ornn's people, the Hearthblood, died as well. Fueled by rage, the Volibear's full power was now unleashed. And so he approached one of the Three Sisters, who was trying to seal the power of one of the demigods for herself. And before her entire army, he struck her down, blinding her. As centuries rolled by, despite the Volibear's resistance, people started worshipping the Three Sisters instead. And soon, instead of facing the raw nature of the Freljord, the mortals started building homes, herding animals, and farming crops. The Volibear roared in fury because this was not his Freljord. The change happened slowly, but over time, the Volibear realized that the tribes had been cut off from the spirit of the land, making them frail and soft. After witnessing this change, the Volibear swore to tear down all evidence of civilization and return the Freljord to its ancient state of true wilderness. The people would become strong again, and he would be honored and feared by all. These days, as the thunder roars over the distant mountains, more and more answer its call, and slowly the old ways are being remembered, which means that the Volibear grows stronger with each new follower. Although that is it for Volibear's bio, on Universe you may notice that there are a lot of other stories connected to him. But from these stories, the Tales of Ornn have 5 chapters, and only the last chapter really mentions Volibear. That's the one that described his battle with Ornn. Next, the story called Voice from the Hearth shows us the remains of Ornn's mountain, which again was called Hearth Home. This story revealed that these days, the place is called the Half Mountain of Old Ornn. And in this story, a local Freljordian tribe witnessed a brief clash between the Volibear and Ornn. So the purpose of the Voice from the Hearth was to show us that the two brothers still fight. But the newest addition to Volibear's lore is the story Stormbringer. And this one is interesting, because as some of you may know, in Udyr's story, when the Ursine call upon the Volibear, they summon the abomination known as the Thousand-Pierced Bear. But the Stormbringer story shows us what happens when you are not one of the Ursine, but you still decide to call upon the Volibear. So now, here's the story called Stormbringer. The story begins with a human shouting out the name Valier. This name hadn't been spoken aloud in ages, and so when the Volibear heard it, he thought it was just a dream, and he continued his slumber in the snow. But when he heard the words, "Valier, with your name, with this blood, I call upon you," the demigod's eyes flicked open, because he realized it wasn't a dream. The voice came from half a land away, but to the demigod's ears it was clear. With a low growl, as the great bear rose, an avalanche of snow fell from his titanic form. He could smell the blood tribute in the air, and a thrill ran through him. Somewhere, stones had been arranged to form his rune. A sacrifice had been made in his name, and he felt the power of that worship infuse his limbs. As the voice continued to call upon his fury and strength, the Volibear's own heart started to beat in time with the distant drums of war. He could even hear the stamping feet, the clashing of blades, and the cries of the dying. All of it called to the body he wore. It called to him. With that, the Volibear roared to the heavens, a sound that touched every living soul in Freljord. Hundreds of miles away, where the sun never rose, a spirit walker woke up screaming, clawing at his face with hands that were twisted into talons. Across the land in a different direction, a pack of Rhymefangs howled, echoing the demigod's cry. And elsewhere, far, far away, a group of tribesmen sitting around fires fell silent, their hearts suddenly thundering. Friends looked at friends with hostile expressions. Blood would be spilled. Meanwhile, the Volibear dropped on all fours, surging forward. Boulders and trees were smashed out of his path as he picked up speed. When next he paused to sniff the air again, he was hundreds of miles away. He was getting close. The storm clouds of his war rage gathered nearby. The next time his name was called, with an earth-shattering impact, the God Bear arrived above the battlefield. Below him, he saw 2 armies soaked in blood, but one was vastly outnumbered. They were fighting a losing battle. Something smelled wrong about the larger army. Its humans were clad in black iron and fought beneath a red banner. He growled as he realized these were not Freljordians. He bared his teeth and a lightning flashed, sending the charred bodies of both armies flying. Next, the great bear turned towards the voice that kept calling his name. It was a mortal woman clad in fur, her face splattered with gore. She raised a pair of bloodied axes to the sky in salute. After which she turned towards the battlefield, and she hurled herself at the enemy with renewed vigor. Then the Volibear too faced the enemy, and he charged in, with a roar spoken in an ancient tongue, which shook the heavens themselves. Bones crunched, blood splashed, voices wailed, and in mere moments, the war was over. The enemy turned to run, but the Freljordians, now filled with savage rage of the Volibear, hunted them down like wolves. The Volibear watched the slaughter in satisfaction, blood dripping from his maw. After that, the woman who called upon him dropped down to her knee, and she introduced herself as War Mother Wraitha, the Bloodied Hand, and she thanked the Volibear for saving her village. It was only then, after Volibear's rage faded, that he noticed the farms and the houses around him. And when he looked back at the woman, his form grew bigger and bigger as his anger returned. At that point, his body was ready to continue ripping and tearing. A moment later, he shouted at the woman in his forgotten tongue, but when the woman just stared back at him confused, he used the younger, bastardized language which she understood. He told her to rise. Warriors knelt to nobody. After that, he demanded to know what happened to his river. It was blocked by a dam, which was something the Freljordians clearly built. The power of the river was supposed to flow freely. To hold it back was an abomination. The Volibear stomped past the woman, and with a roar, he tore down the stones and freed the waters. Now the river was thundering as it was meant to be. Volibear watched in satisfaction as the natural force grew, and the waters demolished entire settlements beneath. With all evidence of civilization gone, he turned towards the Freljordians. He could taste their fear as he told them that today they were free, and he commanded them to live wild, hunt, kill, and honor the old ways, so that the old ways could honor them. War Mother Wraitha stood tall now, nodding. The Volibear knew she had the spirit of a true warrior, and that others would follow her. The Volibear then nodded back, and he returned to the horizon. And that was the complete story of Volibear. In the Stormbringer story, it was interesting to see that the Volibear that woke up wasn't like the one the Ursine summoned. Although the story didn't really describe his appearance, just the fact that the Volibear spoke to the Freljordians with a sense of purpose is way different from the Volibear the Ursine summoned, where he just wanted to destroy and consume life. Also, in this story it was mentioned that they called to his current form. This might have been just a random word, but it surely is suspicious. This really feeds the theory that the Volibear is the warrior spirit of Freljord, and depending on who summons him, and with what purpose, the Volibear can take different forms. Even the bio mentioned that the Volibear is destruction, strength, and storm made manifest, and that he represents the fury of the Freljord, so even that fits in. Maybe the Volibear really is just a force in Freljord, and the bear, depending on how he is summoned, is the force made manifest. With that said, since we are talking about godly powers that shape the very lands of Freljord, perhaps it is fine if we don't know all the details of how the Volibear works. Sometimes a good godly mystery can be turned into something great later on. For example, since the new little legends have descriptions that mention real places of Runeterra, the question of can this Bardir be canon is a great mystery.